Welcome, beautiful souls, to another episode of Uncovering Your Inner Power. I'm your host, Jill Ripley, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend a little time with me today. Have you ever found yourself wishing someone else would simply tell you the right decision to make? Should I stay or should I leave? Should I take the new job? Should I end the relationship? Should I move? Should I finally start the business I've been dreaming about? We spend so much of our lives searching for certainty. We want to know that if we make the leap, everything will work out exactly as we hope. But life rarely offers that kind of guarantee. Instead, life seems to offer us something much smaller: the next step. And I've come to believe that perhaps this is exactly as it's meant to be. Because if we already knew how every chapter would unfold, there would be very little room for growth. There would be very little room for faith. And there would be very little room for becoming. As I've reflected on my own life, I've realized something interesting. I've made decisions in many different ways. There have been times when I've made my decisions out of fear. There have been times when I acted impulsively, without much thought at all. And there have been other times when I became very quiet, listened to my heart, trusted my instincts, and simply took the next step without knowing where it would lead. Reflecting on my past and the many ways I've made decisions, I found that the decisions that created the most suffering in my life weren't usually the ones where I took the leap. They were the times when I already knew deep inside that something needed to change. But I stayed. I stayed because it felt familiar. I stayed because I worried about making the wrong decision. I stayed because fear convinced me that staying was safer than moving. The interesting thing about fear is that it isn't trying to ruin our lives. It's actually trying to protect us. Our ego developed to keep us safe. It scans constantly for danger. The problem is that it doesn't always know the difference between actual danger and uncertainty. To the ego, almost anything unfamiliar feels risky. Healing feels risky. Love feels risky. Speaking your truth feels risky. Changing careers feels risky. Starting over feels risky. Following your dreams feels risky. The ego has one primary objective, and that is to keep the status quo at any cost. Because what is familiar feels safe, sometimes even if it's painful. But life isn't designed to stand still. Everything in nature moves. The seasons change, trees grow, rivers flow. Even our own bodies are constantly renewing themselves, moment by moment. Life evolves through movement, and so do we. One of the strongest beliefs I have is that life is not about making the perfect decision. In fact, I don't spend much time worrying about whether a decision is right or wrong anymore. Instead, I ask myself a different question. Is this choice aligned with my heart? Because I've learned that when I listen to my deepest inner knowing, I may not always arrive where I expected, but I always arrive somewhere I needed to grow. That doesn't mean that the road is easy. Sometimes it's incredibly uncomfortable. Sometimes it's heartbreaking. Sometimes it asks more of me than I ever imagined I could give. but every experience has expanded me. Every experience has taught me something. Every experience has shaped the person I continue to become. I've also come to realize that very few decisions permanently define our lives. Most decisions simply become the beginning of our next lesson. If we discover we've chosen a path that no longer feels aligned, we can choose again. If we realize we've outgrown a relationship, we can choose again. If we discover a dream has changed, it is perfectly okay to change your mind and choose again. Life isn't asking us to be perfect. It's asking us to participate, to remain engaged, to continue responding as life unfolds. The only decision that truly keeps us stuck is believing we have no choice. Because not making a decision is still a decision. Remaining in a situation because we're afraid to move is still movement. It's movement towards more of the same. It's a painful feedback loop. Sometimes we think we're avoiding pain by staying exactly where we are, but staying has consequences too. That dream remains unwritten. That conversation never happens. That relationship never changes. The business never begins. The healing never starts. Not because we aren't capable, but because fear quietly convinces us to wait for certainty. Fear still has a voice in my life. I don't think that's something we ever completely outgrow. There are still times when I hesitate, times when I stay in situations longer than I probably should. But when I finally listen to what my heart has been telling me all along, I've never regretted taking this step. It hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been comfortable, but it has always brought me growth. When I talk about listening to your inner wisdom, for me, it isn't a loud voice. It isn't dramatic, and it doesn't usually explain the entire journey. And I know there will be many questions along the way, but this quiet knowing, gentle nudge, and deep feeling says, this way. Fear, on the other hand, is usually much louder. It demands guarantees. It wants certainty. It imagines every possible worst-case scenario. Inner wisdom simply invites. It doesn't force. It doesn't panic. It patiently waits for us to trust it. One of the things I find fascinating is that no matter where you look in the world's wisdom traditions, the invitation is remarkably similar. Again and again, we're reminded that growth requires trust, that we aren't meant to have every answer before we begin, that the path reveals itself one step at a time. Whether those teachings come from ancient scriptures, spiritual teachers, or generations of wisdom passed down from one person to another, the message remains the same. Take the next step. Trust. Keep moving. Not because you know exactly what will happen, but because life unfolds for those willing to walk the path. I've come to realize that faith isn't believing life will unfold according to my plans. Faith is trusting that whatever unfolds, I will learn from it. I will adapt, I will grow, and when necessary, I will choose again. That realization has been incredibly liberating because my confidence no longer comes from believing I can predict the future. My confidence comes from trusting myself to meet whatever the future brings. Maybe that's what inner power is really all about. Not certainty, not perfection, not fearlessness, but the quiet confidence that says, I don't know exactly where this path will lead, but I trust myself to walk it. If you're facing a decision today, I'd like to leave you with this thought. Perhaps your job isn't to make the perfect choice. Perhaps your job is to simply make the next honest one. Trust your heart. Live authentically. Listen for the quiet wisdom beneath the noise. Then take one step. Then allow life to respond. Because life evolves through movement, and so will you. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who may be standing at the edge of a decision, wondering whether to stay where they are or trust themselves enough to take the next step. I'd also like to invite you to become a part of this growing community. Please consider following or subscribing to the podcast so you never miss a future conversation. If you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, those small acts of support help more people discover the show. If you'd like a little more encouragement between episodes, you can join my newsletter, where I share reflections, future offerings, and other resources to support your journey. And I will put the links in the show notes. We can also connect on Instagram, where I share daily inspiration and continue these conversations throughout the week. However you choose to be here, thank you. Your time is precious, and I'm truly grateful you've chosen to spend a small part of it with me. Until next time, keep listening to the quiet wisdom within. One small step at a time, life has a beautiful way of unfolding. Remember, your future isn't created by having all the answers. It's created one courageous, wholehearted choice at a time.